Right now, there is a massive protest happening in Canada. This protest is basically trying to fight against the mandates that the U.S. and Canadian governments have set up when it comes to traveling, across the border as a trucker and needing to be vaccinated to do it during COVID. These protesters are against that. Now, this protest is being led by, for the most part, a shit ton of right-wing white nationalist nut jobs who literally have built entire careers on trafficking and misinformation and radicalizing people to violence and to the far right, okay? Just no doubt about that whatsoever. On top of that, the conduct of these protesters, even those that aren't necessarily doing anything violent, has generally resulted in a massive amount of harm being done not onto just Canada, like the government and the country, but also to the people of Canada. Some of these protests in particular are causing the way of life of the people in the cities where the protests are happening, many of the protesters being either from America or out of province or out of the area, are basically just a bunch of people from not around there coming over to this city and coming over these areas, making it completely unlivable for the people that live there, ruining the economy and the ability for the area's infrastructure to function properly. And all the while, they are advocating for a change in policy that would hurt the people of Canada objectively. It's an unpopular policy that people don't want. And these protesters are basically holding the country and its economy hostage by refusing to cease their actions until the government acquiesces to their demands, which they cannot do. The government cannot acquiesce to these protesters' demands. We cannot lift these COVID restrictions. It will result in the deaths of many more Americans, many more Canadians, okay? It is not an option. Relenting on these restrictions and ceding way to these protesters is under no circumstances a thing that we can do. Okay, that is not the right course of action. Which leads us to one conclusion: the protests have to be stopped. They have to be. These protests aren't just they aren't just like peaceful protests or mostly peaceful protests of dumb people advocating for something dumb that but at least at least they are doing their own thing and they're being peaceful. No, there have been shit tons of weapons confiscated. There are members of small right-wing terror cells organizing there. There are many of them that are armed. There are terror organizations, right-wing terror organizations that the Canadian and American governments seem to believe are using this trucker protests and cryptocurrency sites and whatnot as a way of funding, and fundraising sites as a way of funding terrorist cells, right-wing terrorist cells through this protest. There is a lot of really shady, horrible far-right shit happening. Not to mention, plenty of the protesters have been threatening and harassing and trashing the areas that they're in, a bunch of protesters all around Ottawa, and they're harassing the people living there. They're trashing everything. They're not letting people go through there. I believe that there's a bridge, obviously we read this earlier. There's a bridge between that connects Chicago and I forget what city in Canada. It might be Ottawa. Chicago and Canada, and it is the carrier of 30% of the commerce between Michigan and Canada, and that province of Canada. Pretty significant. And it is completely blocked off. These blockades have severely harmed this. These blockades can't be allowed to stand. So we're basically stuck between a rock and a hard place, where we have to stop these protests in some way, and we've got two options on how we could do it. One of them is the option that Trudeau went with, and the other option is an option that is a little bit more traditional. It's a much more common response to protests. We're going to go ahead and get into them. So the first thing they could have done was what they did, which was Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act of 1988, which basically affords him the power to designate a national crisis, basically, which is arguably what's happening. You could argue that what these protesters are doing is causing a national crisis. Basically allows him to declare it as such and to act with a set of extra legal permissions that will allow him, hopefully, at least in his mind and the mind of many people in his administration and in the government of Canada and America even, will hopefully result in the protests being stopped. One of these things being what is getting all this attention right now, which is Justin Trudeau making a motion that, at least from the research that I've done, all right, and we just read through listened to a bunch of articles, okay, and at no point did it ever say that the government was giving banks and financial institutions the option of freezing the accounts and transactions of certain people involved in the protest. It seems like the state is in some way pressuring, coercing, or pushing these financial institutions such as banks to freeze the finances of those involved in the protest. Now, at first it seemed like maybe they're just freezing the accounts of people involved with actual illegal action at the protests. Now, basically all the protesters are breaking the law, but every person who crosses the street, when the road is empty and they don't hit the little button to make sure that the little walkie guy is there, is jaywalking, and they're breaking the law. Just breaking the law in and of itself doesn't mean that you're morally, deserving of some level of retribution, especially by the state. So you have to make a case for whether or not what they're doing is an actual severe harm, and it does seem to be. When what they're doing is they're cutting off, trade and commerce and whatnot, and they are actually causing real harm. But this isn't just going after the people out there, doing terrorism, selling weapons, financing terrorist cells, right-wing terrorist cells and whatnot. That's not just what this seems to be going after. This also seems to be going after anyone participating in the protests, which I guess does do a good job of ending the protests, but also does set a somewhat concerning precedent. I mentioned this before, but when it comes to the government and when it comes to law, a huge part of how things are done is precedence, okay? If a precedent has been set in the past, you can use that precedent to make an argument for how things ought to be legally today. And you can make an argument that a Canadian Prime Minister taking the motion to freeze the assets of protesters because those protesters are causing economic harm to the country, you can use that logic to justify, or that reasoning to justify some things that I don't think most progressives would be in favor of. Strikes, for example. I mean, strikes cause plenty of economic harm. They do. And yet, I imagine most of us wouldn't be in favor of the Canadian government enacting this type of policy among a massive striking population of Canadians who are causing a significant harm to the Canadian economy. If there was a massive general strike, I assume we wouldn't be in favor of that. At least I'd hope you wouldn't be in favor of that. And while this obviously isn't what's happening, if you are someone who wants to do that in the future, if you are a politician who wants to do something like this to a bunch of striking workers, let's just say you'd be really glad that a precedent like this has been set. That economic harm to the country is enough to declare a state of emergency, enough to cut down on people's rights to protest and demonstrate, even if it is causing harm to the economy. So it's a worthy concern. And I think even most of the people, at least in the government, politicians, experts, journalists, etc., even those that are in favor of the actions taken by Trudeau, seem to be at least a little bit worried about the precedent that it sets and the, let's be real, absolute instance of the state impeding on your ability to demonstrate and protest, as this is. Because that is what this is an instance of. Whether or not it's justified is a whole other case. This is an example of the state clamping down on your freedom to demonstrate. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That is what this is. That is a observation of the world, not a moral statement. However, there's another option besides what Trudeau went with, and honestly, I think it'd probably be the best option to go with for a variety of reasons, and that is deployment of the military or police. Now, My meme response for why I think that ideally military deployment would be better, would be because if there are white supremacist terrorists among these protesters that are going to behave violently when asked to leave, I want the military to be there fully armed, because God knows I want to see the video of a bunch of good old boys from Alberta getting mowed down by military dudes as they try to go full John Rambo during this protest. That would be absolutely hysterical to me, okay? And would be a much permanent solution to the problem than just freezing their accounts. Listen, okay? It is a much... If they end up going full violence, all right, that's a much more permanent solution, okay? Now, that's pretty fucked, Xan. Chat, you guys realize the vast majority of the people at these protests would, if they could press a button that would make all of you be lynched instantly, the vast majority of them would probably hit that button, because most of you guys are either POC, queer, or just basically most of you are just POC and queer, and they don't like those groups. So they would hit the lynch you button instantly if they had the opportunity, okay? I have absolutely no sympathy for the people in this protest, okay? And I want to get that off the table right away. I don't give a shit about these people having their finances frozen. I don't give a shit about them. You think I care that they're having their finances frozen? I think it's hilarious. I think it's fucking hysterical that they are having this happen to them. However, as much as I may find it funny when my worst enemy gets hit by a car, I wouldn't then immediately walk out in the street and stand where my friend, my friend got hit or whatever. I wouldn't just stand there and wait to get hit as well. The point that I'm making is that I'm not making this take out of defense for these protesters, though. I will say I'm concerned about the future of Canadians' right to protest in the future. I used future twice there. I am worried. And if you're a Canadian, you should be too. Even if you agree with this, you should still at least be a little bit concerned about your rights to protest in the future. Because a precedent has been set here, and no doubt at some point in the future, we are going to see a left-wing movement or protest see a very similar, if not more extreme example of their rights to demonstrate be infringed on. And there will probably be some pretty strong connections between that action and the precedent set by this decision. At the end of the day, there isn't really much point in crying over spilled milk. It's done and over with now. Whether or not Trudeau freezing these accounts is actually going to work is a whole other scenario. Personally, I don't think it will. I think most of these protesters might stick it out, and I think the military and police will probably have to come out, and I think there's probably going to be a fair amount of casualties because of it, probably a good amount of deaths, probably a good amount of injuries. I'm sure shots will be fired at some point, depending on how things go about it, but yeah, we'll see. It's only 30 days. Wait, actual T, if I froze your finances for 30 days, do you think I would be dead by the end of the month if you froze my finances today. If Justin Trudeau froze my PayPal right now, I would be dead, okay? I'm sorry. All of my money exists digitally, guys. All of my money exists digitally. I don't have cash. You know how I get cash? I go to an ATM and I put my card in it and I pull out exactly how much cash I need and no more and no less. So if my accounts got frozen, can't pay rent, I wouldn't be able to buy food, I wouldn't be able to do transportation, none of my bills would be able to get paid. For 30 whole days, I wouldn't be able to pay for anything, okay? Now, granted, I have a job in which all of my money exists on the internet. Well, that's dramatic, Xan. Well, like I said, I do a job in which all of my money is digital. I don't get cash. Like, YouTube doesn't just, like, print out a billfold of fucking cash whenever I get paid through my computer or anything. It's like, it's all digital, which means if my bank account or my PayPal or both got frozen today, that's 30 days of no money for me, okay? You can't withdraw money from your accounts when it's frozen. You have no cash. If all your money is in your accounts and you need cash to be able to buy food and stuff like that, and you don't have any cash on you, you can't withdraw anything from your bank account when your account is frozen. The act is active for 30 days. The accounts are not frozen for 30 days. Okay. How long are they frozen then for? Because the act said that they want these banks to permanently freeze their accounts. It's not that their accounts are frozen for 30 days. It's their accounts are either permanently suspended or frozen for some given amount of time, it would seem. Because in that one article, they did say that the Canadian government wants them to fully stop, like certain financial institutions to fully stop working with certain people involved in the protests entirely. Xan, do you think that pulling the military would minimize any further harm? That pulling out the military would minimize any further harm? No. Dark Mind, no. The Canadian trucker protesters are very violent, it seems. They're armed and they seem to be making threats towards the government, and they are causing disruptions and issues, and I have no doubt that more violence will occur. I think that like the military probably should go in and just fucking deal with it, honestly. If it's literally only those two options. It's either the setting a precedent like that, or deploying the military or police against protesters that are breaking the law, something that is a precedent that's been set in America and Canada for literal decades, or probably centuries, but decades at least. Just sending the police out to bash some protesters. There's no way, no say how long banks are being frozen. Well, actual T, did the article not say that the government is requesting that the banks permanently suspend any services towards certain people? So no doubt, like the actual organizers of this protest, the Canadian government wants them to permanently not have any financial supporting them. Yeah, I know T. Owen Zanderhall, I don't think there's a set length to freeze the accounts, probably on a case-by-case basis. Could be as little as an afternoon. If you stop giving to the protests and resolve the issues with the bank. Yeah, we'll have to see. To deny them service, Zanderhall, denying them service can mean many things, from blocking individual transactions to freezing the account. Suspending services doesn't mean freezing accounts. Yeah, that's the issue, though, Nordic Jer. We don't know what that entails, though, right? It's so broad. It could literally just be just freezing their account, or it could be full on suspending their service. The way that the article worded it implied to me, at least, permanently suspend at least some of their service. At least some of their services permanently. When I say services, I mean some of them. We need ideas for a $500 mark. Yeah, we do. We need to get another. We gotta get the Sonic onesie, okay? Like an actual Sonic onesie to switch into. At 500, and then at 1,000, we can get a Supersonic onesie, okay? And then I put on the Supersonic onesie, the Sonichu one, at that number at 1,000. Do a Pokemon Smash or Pass segment? No, thank you. Anyway, also, wait, I wanted to get into this as well. Vosh got mega canceled on Twitter for this, and I gotta say, while I'm not necessarily super strong on either side of this, either the military deployment or the freezing of accounts, I gotta say, those of you on the pro-Trudeau side of things that have been engaging in the Vosh cancellation have been absolutely cringy as fuck. What a way to do a terrible job representing your side of things. I've been seeing literal 2 IQ level arguments from the fucking idiots on Trudeau's on the pro Trudeau side of things. DGG, is Destiny even in favor of what Trudeau did? Last time I saw Destiny talk about vaccine mandates, he was saying he's not in favor of them anymore, so I'd be surprised. But I've unironically been seeing people calling Vosh out and pointing out that Lauren Southern agrees with Vosh as if it's an argument. I've unironically been seeing people that I once considered to be respectable on Twitter, quote tweeting Vosh and saying, when Lauren Southern agrees with you, maybe you should reconsider your opinion. And it's holy shit, Lauren Southern also probably doesn't like having the feeling of a cactus shoved down your throat. Oh my god, I better shove a cactus down my throat, otherwise I'm just like Lauren Southern, dude. I saw people making arguments like that, and it literally poisoned the well in favor of Vosh's side of things, because I was seeing how stupid everyone on that side of things was being on Twitter. Not a single argument did I see on Twitter in the last 2 days in favor of the Trudeau thing. The best argument I've seen is just the articles that I've read. Honestly, the articles that I've read have given me better arguments for this than anything else. Yeah, this is actually pretty like on the tier of the level of engagement that I've seen most of like the Trudeau defenders engaging in on Twitter, where it's like, so here's a meme of Vosh, a meme Vosh posted, and it's like the angry guy and he's driving down the road. All right, the wait wasn't too long. Past the border crossing, shouldn't take too long to get there. I don't think Canada's that big. So very obviously, just a meme. Very obviously a fucking joke. Like, very obviously a joke. And then Destiny quote tweets it with a tweet from Vosh talking about Destiny, saying the rapid descent into Sam Hyde tier meta irony to avoid literally all criticism. So apparently this is Sam Hyde tier meta irony to avoid all criticism. Yeah, just about every argument on this side of things has been on the same level of IQ as what Destiny just posted here. So yeah. Pretty fucking dumb, if I'm being honest. What? Basically, it's Destiny trying to avoid criticism. Anyway, guys, okay? This is not as big a deal as you guys are making it out to be, okay? This is Canadian politics, okay? Stop letting Canadian politics tear apart the internet, okay? I can't believe I had to actually force myself to talk about Canadian politics today, okay? You made me do that, chat. You made me do that. All right. My lovely, lovely viewers, today may end one of two ways. Either you're all going to agree with me, or a shit ton of you are going to disagree with me and unsubscribe. That is the only way that this ends, okay? I don't know how it's going to end. I can't see the future, and I can't predict it despite, how many memes there are about me doing that. I'm not actually capable of doing that. However, we are going to be talking about something that currently has Vosh canceled all hell on Twitter right now, and I'm sure I'll be following him momentarily if Vosh is correct on his take, and I agree with him. So let's find out if he is then, right? So what has happened? What is going on? What is occurring? Basically, Canada has been having some stuff happen. Now, normally I don't pay like any attention to Canada because it's not America, and I'm American, and well, I mean, Canadian politics don't affect me in as many ways as I think American politics tend to affect Canadians. So I'm not as caught up on all of it, right? But from my understanding, there has been a massive protest all across Canada having to do with COVID vaccination mandates, particularly when it has to do with truckers crossing the border. Now, these protests are, as you can imagine, very fucking stupid. Not only are they stupid in what they're actually advocating for, but what they're doing is causing a fair amount of harm. Apparently, every day, hundreds of millions of dollars are, the Canadian economy is taking hits in the hundreds of millions of dollars every single day due to the blockages in infrastructure, the inability for things to make it where they need to get to go. People aren't able to get around the way they need to. It's causing just general disturbances in regards to like the environment where it's happening. You know, it's just a big fucking trucker protest, big protest convoy type thing. And it's just generally the vast majority of Canadians hate it, disagree with the protest, and don't like what they're doing. However, I am still in favor of people having the right to protest, regardless of how stupid I think that what they're protesting for is, even if, so long as they aren't actually doing any violence, what they're doing is causing some level of harm. I'm typically not in favor of people like clamping down on people's right to protest there. Jan 6th? This is not comparable to January 6th. Wait, what? Hey, I haven't even gotten into the thing yet, and you can't. That is not a good argument, okay? This is not comparable to January 6th. January 6th was an insurrection attempt in which a bunch of people attacked the capital of the country, broke in, people died, and they were there to kidnap and kidnap elected representatives, kill and or subvert the results of our democratically decided election, okay? Not really comparable to January 6th, okay? That was not an example of people peacefully protesting to demonstrate their disagreement with something the government is doing. So, with that said, let's learn, okay? Because I don't know enough about it to really give you guys all that strong of a take on it. So we're going to learn about it together. Now, I understand that reading articles is very boring and dry. Don't pretend like it's not, okay? We all know that reading fucking sucks. No one likes to sit down and read through a bunch of dry, fucking boring articles about whatever protest is happening. It's not fun, but you have to do it if you're going to be properly informed on the issue. So I've brought up 4 particular articles here that we're going to be, or 5 articles we're going to be going over here, that I think do a decent job of covering most of the bases on which we are, or bases on which we're going to be talking. So the first one is a fact check by CNN Politics. Strong majority of Canadians oppose convoy protests, poll after poll finds. The next one is Trudeau vows to freeze anti-mandate protesters' bank accounts by BBC News. Another CNN one, Ottawa police chief is leaving his post, city officials say, amid ongoing protests. Then another opinion piece by the Washington Post. Opinion, Justin Trudeau's move to end the trucker protest was risky but correct. So we're going to be hearing an opinion piece on that side of things. And then a CBS News article saying, banks are moving to freeze accounts linked to convoy protests. Here's what you need to know. That takes a bit more of a critical position on what Trudeau has done. So as much as we could sit here for the next 2 hours reading all of these aloud, and as much as my throat would absolutely despise that, if you're someone who doesn't like reading articles, I got a nice little thing for you, okay? So you found a news article, all right? And you want to consume all the information in it, but you don't want to have to read it. What you can do is you can actually just scroll over all of this all the way to the bottom. It's a little harder if there's images. Oh, we weren't trying to search that. We're trying to copy it. It's a little harder if there's images breaking up the text here, but this one's like very convenient. And then you want to go to naturalreaders.com. And then you're going to go ahead and Control V, whatever you copied into there. So you can take the entire article. And then you're going to press play. And now we can just listen to the article be read to us and comment on what we hear at the end of it. Enjoy, guys.
Washington on Fox shows people who are opposed to the ongoing Canadian protests against vaccination mandates, COVID-19 restrictions, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have been portrayed as elites out of touch with the views of everyday workers. Baityungar Sargon, deputy opinion editor of Newsweek, tweeted on Monday, "Don't let the fact that the mainstream media is hiding this fool you. Canadians support the Freedom Convoy." In fact, poll after poll, including the very poll Ungar Sargon was referencing, has shown that most Canadians oppose the protests and support both vaccination mandates and various restrictions intended.
Wait, you don't like this voice? Do you guys want a different one? Can I pick a different voice? Sharon, Ryan, Heather, or Will? We're not doing any non-American voice, okay? Let's hear how Ryan sounds.
In fact, poll after poll, including the very poll Ungar Sargon was referencing, has shown that most Canadians oppose.
I like that one a lot. Here, what about Will? I want to hear Will first.
In fact, poll after poll, including the very poll Ungar Sargon was referencing, has shown that most Canadians oppose the protests and support both vaccination.
All right, we'll go with Ryan then.
In fact, poll after poll, including the very poll Ungar Sargon was referencing, has shown that most Canadians oppose the protests and support both vaccination mandates and various restrictions intended to limit the spread of the virus. The polling figures suggest it is Fox's cheerleading for the protests that is out of touch with the views of a significant majority of the Canadian public. In addition, one of the recent Canadian polls has been falsely described this week in some pockets of conservative media. While that poll did show that there is considerable Canadian discontent with Trudeau's handling of the protests, it's not true that only 16% of Canadians said they want Trudeau back as Prime Minister, as a Fox contributor claimed, or that only 16% would vote for Trudeau again, as the right-wing Washington Examiner reported. Here's an explanation of how the 16% figure is being misused, followed by a look at some of the actual findings of 4 February polls of Canadian adults. Poll question about Trudeau has been falsely described. The Washington Examiner reported Sunday that a new poll showed that only 16% of Canadians would vote again for Trudeau as Prime Minister. Fox contributor Tammy Bruce made a similar claim on television on Monday. 16% would want him back as the Prime Minister. So that tells you about where people are and how they're viewing this. But both the Examiner and Bruce were wrong. The poll they were citing, conducted by Maru Public Opinion, did not even ask people if they would support Trudeau in another election or wanted him back as Prime Minister. Rather, the poll tried to gauge how
The rest of this should be mostly irrelevant to what's going on right now, so we don't need to listen to the rest of this. This is mostly just polling having to do with Canadians' opinions on the protest. Basically, the reason why I showed this article, despite it not having much relevance to what's going on right now besides the polling, is to point out that this protest and the push for it is fueled by just as much of a astroturf propaganda, right-wing misinformation campaign as any right-wing movement here in America, okay? It is the same kind of shit, all right? And there's a purpose in bringing this up, and it's in that there is a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of it will no doubt be spread by the Canadian right. And I'm sure the American right too, but the Canadian right mostly, I'm sure. So we note the vast majority of Canadians are against the protests, are not in favor of it, and seem to be, while some of them have issues with Justin Trudeau's handling of the protests, at least up until this point, they are mostly in favor of how things have gone, for the most part. I think it's worth acknowledging that for most of them seem to be in favor of Justin Trudeau's handling. The next article is by BBC. Trudeau vows to freeze anti-mandate protesters' bank accounts. We're going to go ahead and listen to this entire article. I'm going to have to copy and paste it, but let's go ahead and start, huh?
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has taken the unprecedented step of invoking the Emergencies Act to crack down on anti-vaccine mandate protests. Mr. Trudeau said the scope of the measures would be time-limited, reasonable and proportionate, and would not see the military deployed. With no need for court orders, banks can freeze personal accounts of anyone linked with the protests. Hundreds of demonstrators remain in Canada's capital city. On Sunday, law enforcement cleared anti-mandate protesters at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, a critical pathway for Canada-US trade, after a week-long stalemate. What began as a rally against a new rule that all truckers must be vaccinated to cross the US-Canada border, or quarantine upon return, has grown into a broader challenge to all COVID health restrictions. This is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting people's jobs, Mr. Trudeau told a news conference on Monday. He said the police would be given more tools to imprison or fine protesters and protect critical infrastructure. Mr. Trudeau told reporters the legislation would be applied temporarily and in a highly specific manner. Critics have noted that the Prime Minister voiced support for farmers in India who blocked major highways to New Delhi for a year in 2021, saying at the time, "Canada will always be there to defend the right of peaceful protest." Mr. Trudeau's invoking of the Emergencies Act comes as demonstrations across Canada enter their third week. Explainer: what powers will Emergencies Act give Trudeau? The scene, after police raid, what next for Canada protests? Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland said at Monday's news conference that banks would be able to freeze personal accounts of anyone linked with the protests without any need for a court order. Vehicle insurance of anyone involved with the demonstrations can also be suspended, she added. Ms. Freeland said they were broadening Canada's terrorist financing rules to cover cryptocurrencies and crowdfunding platforms, as part of the effort.
All right, guys. We are currently 2 bits in so far, and I'm going to go ahead and give my take on what we've heard so far. Not good. Gonna be real. Maybe there's going to be more that we're going to hear as we go further into these articles that are going to maybe a little bit more details that'll change my mind, but not good. Suspending freezing the bank accounts and suspending the car insurance of the vehicles of the people protesting. I'm going to be honest here. Maybe there's more to it than I know, and we're going to see. But at least from what it sounds like to me, this sounds like a case of it's okay when we do it, but not okay when they do it. As in, when people on the left are okay with certain levels of disorderly conduct that could cause harm to society if somebody on the left with good opinions is advocating for it, but when it's people on the right advocating for bad things, now it's bad. when hopefully you hope to have pretty broad and equal treatment under the law of people, regardless of their opinions. All right, let's continue.
It's all about following the money, she said. She spoke after hackers released details of what they said were 93,000 donations for the truckers, totaling $8.4 million to the crowdfunding platform Give a Send Go. The Emergencies Act, passed in 1988, requires a high legal bar to be invoked. It may only be used in an urgent and critical situation that seriously endangers the lives, health or safety of Canadians. Lawful protests do not qualify. Speaking on Monday, Canada's Justice Minister David Lametti argued these conditions had been met. But the Canadian Civil Liberties Association disagreed, warning that the move threatens our democracy and our civil liberties. Ottawa protest leader Tamara Lich dismissed Mr. Trudeau's move, telling AP News, "There are no threats that will frighten us. We will hold the line." Ontario Premier Doug Ford, a Conservative, said he supported the federal government, but the premiers of Quebec, Manitoba, Alberta and Saskatchewan said the emergency powers were not needed in their regions. Before Mr. Trudeau's announcement, Quebec Premier François Legault said invoking the Emergencies Act could throw oil on the fire.
I will say, this is a real rock and a hard place situation for Trudeau and the Canadian government. I assume this is the end of the article, but it's a real rock and a hard place situation because these protesters and what they're doing are causing objective harm to the Canadian people. And they're a very small minority who aren't representative of the people of Canada, who are causing genuine harm to both the economy and the ability for Canada's sort of infrastructure to operate. Along all of that, there is a massive propaganda campaign spreading misinformation to convince the Canadian people that there is broader support for these protests than there really are. And so you're put into this rock and a hard place where it's like, we can't make them stop fucking up the country because if they keep doing this, they're gonna fuck everything up. You know, they're fucking up the economy. They're fucking up all of our infrastructure. They're fucking up the ability for people to get around. They're making everybody upset. And you're stuck in this place where it's either we shut this down or let it keep happening. I guess they went with the shut it down option. I guess the problem that a lot of people have is that shut it down option doesn't really seem proportional with what's happened, right? Doesn't really seem like these protesters are doing something on the scale of malicious acts of like anti-democratic action as like what we saw in the January 6th riot. I agree with Vosh. The military should give them 24-hour notice to leave or be arrested. Yeah, like the other option would be police, right? Bring the military out, violent option, or at least threatening violence.
Will Trudeau succeed? Analysis by Jessica Murphy, BBC News, Toronto. Under growing pressure to bring the disruptive protests to an end, be it from the White House or increasingly frustrated Canadians, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has entered uncharted territory. With the decision to invoke the never-before-used 1988 Emergencies Act, the country's most powerful tool for when it is facing a national emergency. The powers announced by Mr. Trudeau go into effect immediately, but his government has to present it to the House of Commons and the Senate within a week and needs a green light or the proclamation would be revoked. All main Canadian federal political party leaders have said it's time for the protests, which have had an impact on supply chains, the national economy and the country's relations with the U.S., to end. But they aren't all necessarily on board with Mr. Trudeau's unprecedented move. Conservative leader Candice Bergen voiced concern it could inflame the situation. The support of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh may give Mr. Trudeau enough votes to pass it through the House, though the Senate could still be a hurdle. Is Trudeau losing his fight against truckers? 1PX Transparent Line. Protests are ongoing.
I should point out, by the way, I don't even think the majority of Canadian truckers are in favor of these protests even. Like, even that demographic, I don't even think is like all that in favor of these protests. Xander Hall, there were bomb threats and with actual shells shown on camera. They are smuggling weapons. There was an arson attempt. They're holding hospitals under siege and preventing ambulances from leaving or coming in. Civilians have been assaulted and threatened with rape by participants. Nordique Jer, go ahead and link that to me. Link me a article that goes into detail about that. because I'd really like to hear about all the laws and bullshit that the protesters are doing, because if the protesters are doing enough bad shit, you can justify this type of action. Because then it's not just peaceful protesting anymore. Yeah, send that over my way.
1px Transparent Line. Protests are ongoing in various parts of the country. In Ottawa, the nation's capital, between 400 to 500 trucks have been parked in the city centre for 18 days. Protesters have also been blockading border crossing at Coutts, Alberta, and Emerson, Manitoba. On Monday, Alberta police arrested 11 people and seized a cache of guns and other weapons.
Oh, there we go.
Weekend protests have also taken place in cities including Toronto and Winnipeg.
So, sounds like there's some sussy-wussy shit. Not surprising, but still. Sounds like there's some sussy-wussy shit going on at these protests. Sounds like there's some weapons being exchanged. Sounds like there's some possible right-wing terrorism being organized. It's a valid concern. That seems to be playing a significant part into their decision here, is that there is a high chance of right-wing terrorists using this protest as a way to organize and sell weapons and whatnot. You know, that's a decent worry. I can understand that perspective. Okay.
Amid ongoing protests against Canada's COVID-19 regulations, officials in Canada's capital and the police chief have reached a separation agreement, according to the chairperson of the Police Services Board. Peter Slally and the Ottawa Police Services Board reached a mutually agreeable separation, and as such Chief Peter Slally is no longer employed with the Ottawa Police Service, Board Chair Diane Deans said during a meeting Tuesday afternoon. While Deans thanked Slally for his service, she opened the meeting by saying that police were so far unable to achieve peace in the city. The Ops has been unable to adequately enforce our laws and our residents continue to be terrorized. It isn't good enough, Deans said, adding, I have watched in disbelief as this carnival of chaos has been allowed to continue. Deputy Chief Steve Bell is now the interim chief. Deans said the board would implement a new command structure and would shortly appoint a new chief. Slally released a statement on social media, saying he was stepping down and had done everything he could to keep Ottawa safe. The department has added resources, enforcement tools and has a new integrated command center, he said. I am confident the Ottawa Police Service is now better positioned to end this occupation, he said.
By the way, I want to say, if you find this segment boring, then you should stop complaining about how like any like left-wing live stream content is like not in detail and not like in the, you know, down and dirty enough with the nuance and whatnot, because this is what it looks like when you do a deep dive research segment to make sure that you're well informed on the thing you're talking about. It's fucking boring. I'm sorry, but it is. But hopefully you guys learned something from this.
Slally had said enforcement has been complex and delicate, pointing out that families are embedded within the protesters. The chief had said repeatedly he did not have enough resources to deal with such a large protest. Residents have told CNN they were dismayed by the chief's lack of enforcement on their city streets. The news comes a day after Canada invoked the country's Emergencies Act for the first time in an attempt to sever financial support for protesters' costly blockades at U.S. border crossings. Financial institutions will now have the power to freeze personal or corporate accounts they believe are being used to fund the illegal protests, Minister of Finance Chrystia Freeland said.
So at this point, to be clear, this is fine. They have called for financial institutions to freeze personal or corporate bank accounts they believe are being used to fund illegal protests. Minister of Finance said Monday, right? So if this is just freezing corporate and personal accounts for people that are engaging in like selling guns, organizing right-wing terrorism, stuff like that, that's one thing. But if it's just freezing the accounts of anyone taking part in the protest wholesale, then we're going a little bit too far. That's where I take issue with it. If it is just these individuals, then we're fine. In the same way that, like, what it feels like to me, at least what it sounds like, is that they're doing like the equivalent of if like the US had like literally arrested every person present at January 6th. Like, even if you were just on the edge of the Capitol's property and you weren't going in there, you were just there. Like, I feel like some people have it in their mind that that's the equivalent of what they're doing here. But if what all they're doing is essentially targeted freezing of bank accounts and targeted suspending of people's insurance in their cars if they've committed crime and are using those accounts and using those vehicles to do the crime, then that's just what the government can do already, just doing it without a warrant, or doing it without a court order. Sorry. I mean, that's not necessarily too out of the realm of reasonableness, but let's keep reading, or let's keep listening. Xander Hall, last time Canada did try using the military to address an insurrection attempt, 500 civilians were arrested without warrants, many of whom were minors, some of them simply for having a book that I own. So the argument you're making is that the other option would be military action, and that could result in much worse outcomes.
Financial institutions will now have the power to freeze personal or corporate accounts they believe are being used to fund the illegal protests, Minister of Finance Chrystia Freeland said Monday. This is about following the money. This is about stopping the financing of these illegal blockades, Freeland said. The government will use the law to target those funding protesters who have blocked border crossings, resulting in economic losses of as much as $500 million a day, she said.
How strict are Canada's freedom to demonstrate laws? I'm curious. Just how absolutist are they over in Canada about free speech and whatnot? It's enshrined in the Constitution. So I guess the question you have to put forward here is, what laws are the protesters breaking just by doing the protest? Are the blockades illegal? Is a big question I have. Is simply blocking the infrastructure in and of itself legally not allowed? Is that alone already legal grounds enough for the Canadian government to send police in to forcefully remove them? Yes. Okay. So now here's another question. It's illegal to do the same thing here. If a progressive movement was doing what this trucker protest is doing, and Trudeau did the same thing, would you be in favor of it? That is my question mostly of the Canadians here. Would you be consistent enough to say that if progressives were protesting something you agree with and they were doing the same thing and Trudeau did this, would you be in favor of it? All right, if you say so. As long as you're consistent. They've already sent police to crack down on Indigenous pipeline protests. Yeah, my main concern about this isn't necessarily how it's going to affect these conservative figures. I don't give a shit about these conservative protesters, okay? I'm not sad that their bank accounts are getting frozen or whatever, okay? I don't give a shit about them. What I worry about mostly is the way that the law in most countries functions is one that is based off of precedence, okay? In the law, if you are trying to make something legal, illegal, prosecute someone, keep someone from being prosecuted, precedents that have been set in the past legally have been a huge thing that interlocutors within the legal system have used to justify certain motions they've made in the past. So there's a decent concern that Justin Trudeau doing this, though this is just the Emergencies Act, and he's always had this power. It's not like this is some new law being made or new, privilege being opened up for Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau. I guess the worry is that what stops this from being done to Indigenous and progressive protesters in the future for less? You can make the argument that the Keystone Keystone wasn't in Canada, was it? You can make it was it? I can't remember. You can make an argument that pipeline protesters for oil pipelines in yes, it is. Okay, thank you. In Canada, you can make an argument they are causing some harm to Canada's economy. A lot of Canada is requires natural gas in order to keep the lights on. You can make an argument their protesting is preventing a shit ton of Canadians from having access to reliable power. Though I don't know how true that is. I'm sure you could make the argument. And I'm sure that officials in the government could make that argument. And it's worrying to me that you could start to see the finances of Indigenous protesters in the future frozen next time they decide to stage a blockade of their land when, the government wants to build a pipeline through it again. That is a concern I think that's worth having. I'm not saying this is exactly the same. All I'm saying is the way that laws work, the way that governments work is based off of precedents. And this is setting a fairly extreme precedent. Even the people in support of this do agree this is setting an extreme precedent. And that is worth acknowledging as a concern, even if you're in favor of what Trudeau has done.
And now the U.S. is closely coordinating with Canada to share information on people who might try to participate in blockades, Canadian Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendicino told CNN. The United States is monitoring carefully the blockades in Canada, and what we agreed is that we could continue to share information and to advance the very close collaboration that exists between ARCPSA and the Customs and Border Patrol, so that we can identify any potential individuals who may try to cross the border to advance illegal blockades in Canada, Mendicino said. The Public Safety Minister has been in regular contact with U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, he said. Given the current moment that we are in, we're obviously going to do what we can to bring about the end of these illegal blockades, Mendicino said. An unprecedented move. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Monday he was invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time since it became law in 1988 to blunt the impact of the trucker-inspired protests. The rallies began when a group of truckers moved into Canada's capital on January 29, clogging streets surrounding the Parliament building and elsewhere in downtown Ottawa to protest a new mandate requiring them to be fully vaccinated when crossing the Canadian-US border or face a 2-week quarantine.
What they described there is the definition of a type of protest that here in America, at least, I can't speak for Canadians, but here in America, we typically say we really like. Even if the implications of it are a little bit more spicy than most people will be willing to admit they are. All right. Have you guys heard of a term called civil disobedience? All right. The concept of civil disobedience, actually, we'll just go ahead and read it. Civil disobedience is the active professed refusal of a citizen to obey certain laws, demands, orders, or commands of the government or any other authority. By some definitions, civil disobedience has to be non-violent to be called civil. Hence, civil disobedience is sometimes equated with peaceful protests or non-violent resistance. Are plenty of people among these truckers actually engaging in the organization and planning and selling of guns and organization of right-wing terrorism? No doubt. Seems like the Canadian government is in fear of that, and so is the American government for good reason. However, the general idea of these protests, at least those that are just out there protesting, what they're doing right now, I think, is a pretty decent example of civil disobedience. They don't seem to be being overwhelmingly violent, but they are being civilly disobedient. They are disobeying the laws. They are demonstrating their dislike of the decisions of the federal government of Canada by breaking the law in their demonstrations. Now, in some cases, we're willing to say that's fine. In some cases, we're not, right? We're very selective historically with what protests and what movements we agree with, and who we're willing to accept went too far and didn't go too far and whatnot. And I guess the concern is, it sounds like this protest is a pretty good example of civil disobedience, regardless of how stupid what they're protesting for is. You don't want to implement policies that cut down on people's right to protest. That's my main concern. If it's just about stopping actual illegal activity, that's one thing. If we're cutting down on people's right to protest because their way of protesting is causing like economic trouble, then that's not something I'm in favor of.
They have been joined in Ottawa and at border stops in cities across the nation by others who want an end to other COVID-19 mitigation measures, like mask mandates, lockdowns and restrictions on gatherings. But the protesters are a vocal minority. About 4 in every 5 Canadians are fully vaccinated, and nearly 90% of Canada's truckers are fully vaccinated and eligible to cross the border, the government said. These illegal barricades are doing great damage to Canada's economy and to our reputation as a reliable trading partner, Freeland said. The blockade at the Ambassador Bridge, which was cleared Sunday, impacted about $390 million worth of commerce a day, the minister said. The combined impact of blockades at border crossings, including those in Alberta and Manitoba, has been $500 million each day, Freeland said.
Yikes. That's some pretty substantial hits to the economy. Let's go ahead and hear some more.
These costs are real. They threaten businesses, big and small, Freeland said. The Canadian economy.
Are they blocking ambulances? That's what I want to know. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are blocking ambulances and police cars and fire trucks and stuff like that. Absolutely. There's no doubt about whether or not their protesting is causing actual harm. They're protesting something stupid, they're protesting in favor of a stupid thing and causing harm doing it. There's no doubt about that.
The Canadian economy needs to be doing legitimate work, not to be illegally making us all poorer, in addition to allowing financial institutions to freeze accounts suspected of funding illegal protests. Canada is also requiring crowdfunding sites and payment service providers used by protesters to register with the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada and report any large suspicious donations, including digital payments and with cryptocurrencies. Some sites have raised millions of dollars. While the Emergencies Act allows for the use of the military, the government will not take that step, Trudeau said Monday. The measure can also temporarily suspend citizens' rights to free movement or assembly. But Trudeau said the government is not overriding the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a part of the Canadian Constitution that lays out rights and freedoms that Canadians believe are necessary in a free and democratic society, according to a Canadian government website. We are not preventing people from exercising their right to protest legally, Trudeau said. The law would be limited geographically, in scope and in time, he noted. Ambassador Bridge owner issues call to action. The reopening of the Ambassador Bridge was a win for Michigan's working families who are just trying to do their jobs, and for businesses who can get back to shipping their products and produce, Michigan Gov. Gretchen Whitmer said in a statement Monday. The bridge is the busiest land border crossing in North America, linking Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. It carries nearly 30% of annual trade.
You know, Detroit and Canada being right next to each other is never really something I think much about, you know? I think Detroit, and I think perfect example of like how America has kind of fucked over black people. That's more or less how I like to think about it. I think like, especially like certain parts of St. Louis, just perfect example of like how white supremacy has fucked over black people historically in this country. Like if you want to go anywhere to do a study on on examples of this, you want to go there. The study that that Destiny did, or not Destiny didn't do the study, but Destiny cited it in a debate that he did with the PKA guys once, because Destiny goes on PKA and I watch that podcast a lot, was a study having to do with lead exposure in low-income areas in places like Detroit, Southeast St. Louis and whatnot, and having to do with exposure to lead, particularly in lead paint, because a lot of those buildings haven't been like, they were painted with lead paint like 40 years ago, and then have like, just got painted over and over and over again, and resold, and there's still lead paint on those walls, just under layers of old paint. And so these houses are contaminated with lead, which even a small amount is a pretty dangerous amount of lead. I mean, it's lead, okay? You guys know what I'm talking about. And so that's usually where they do most of those studies having to do with like environmental impacts on like on IQ and crime and stuff like that. Like it's pretty fucked. Pretty fucked.
It carries nearly 30% of annual trade between Michigan and Canada, Whitmer said.
One of the blockades that these protesters are doing is on a bridge that literally seems to be the carrier of 30% of their trade between Michigan and Canada. Obviously, Michigan being a state, you know, right on the border of Canada and America. So pretty damn substantial. That's cutting off a good amount of economic commerce, you know? It's worrying.
That blockade, which caused supply chain issues for automakers on both sides of the border, ended when Canadian authorities cleared pedestrians and vehicles that had been blocking access to the bridge over the weekend. Whitmer thanked U.S. and...
Okay, I have a question. What the fuck happened in St. Louis? Same thing that happened in a lot of places where white supremacy fucked over the black community. Same exact thing. Redlining and a whole lot of segregation. And so, I want to say this. I have a question. Are they going to be cracking down on every protester broadly? Like, or actually, no, here's a better question, because we've already more or less seen that it's mostly about people committing crime. My bigger question is, what about the banks? No permission to do it on their own? Oh, that's like significantly less problematic. If it's just like, oh yeah, hey, if you want to freeze their account, you can, financial institutions. That's much more defensible than like the government making bank accounts freeze people's or banks freeze people's finances. Xander Hall, the press conference was a bit vague, but it was more of a permission thing. Okay, interesting. Okay.
Whitmer thanked U.S. and Canadian border officials and business leaders for their work in resolving the ordeal and said it was important to ensure that this does not happen again. The company that owns the bridge echoed that sentiment and issued a call to action to prevent future closures. We must join together to come up with an actionable plan that will protect and secure all border crossings in the Canada-US corridor and ensure that this kind of disruption is critical. Infrastructure will never happen again, said Matt Maroon, the chairman of Detroit International Bridge Company. They are critical pipelines that supply the goods we need to keep our factories going, our neighbors working, and our economies thriving. In Manitoba, the RCMP said Tuesday that protesters are expected to begin by Wednesday, the result of the resolution reached with the demonstrators. Chief Superintendent Rob Hill said officials were confident protesters would depart and that full access to the Emerson border crossing will be restored. But the standoff at the Coutts border crossing in Alberta took a turn Monday. 11 people were arrested, and authorities seized 13 long guns, handguns, multiple sets of body armor, a machete and a large quantity of ammunition and high-capacity magazines connected to a small, organized group within a larger protest at the crossing, Royal Canadian Mounted Police said. The group...
Okay. Actual small terrorist cells, right-wing terrorist cells, organizing and selling weapons, or at least, maybe not selling, but at the very least carrying weapons at the protest. Okay. All right. That is warranting inaction. Those people raise their accounts. I don't care.
The group was said to have a willingness to use force against the police if any attempts were made to disrupt the blockade, the statement said. This resulted in an immediate and complex investigation to determine the extent of the threatened criminal organization. Ontario to loosen pandemic restrictions. While protests continue in parts of Canada, Ontario Premier Doug Ford said he plans to lift the province's vaccine passport requirements March 1st if hospitalization rates continue to improve.
I will say it is ironic that these people in their trucker protest are just causing the problem or the thing they're protesting against to continue to happen. It's like a cycle. They're just making their own problem worse.
Capacity limits will also be eliminated in all indoor public settings starting March 1st. Though masking requirement.
Xander Hall, I'm more in favor of sending in the troops to arrest them because not only are the truckers threatening ordinary people, they're starting to threaten cops who are largely in favor of their movement to a nominal degree. Yeah, that's a little bit worrying, is that they are... You could actually argue that this freezing method, this bank account freezing method, won't do enough to stop the protests. Because if this is just being done to stop, like, terrorist cells and whatnot, is it really going to do that much to stop them from protesting? You need to deploy police and military to stop that, right? Unless we are planning to freeze the bank accounts of normal protesters, right? You have to do either or, you know? I'd rather it be tried and work than to go straight to the nuclear option and have unneeded casualties. I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, it could be like a more chill start, you know? It's how you like cut your hair like a little bit to start with and see if it's too long and then cut it a bit more, because you can't make your hair longer if you cut it too short, you know? You can always go further if you don't go far enough, but you can't go back if you go too far, you know? Here, we've got ourselves another article. Opinion by the Washington Post. Justin Trudeau's move to end the trucker protest was risky, but correct. One thing I will point out that I've noticed is that it feels like the vast majority of like politicians and like journalists and like it just seems like a lot of fairly well respectable people that know about this situation seem to, even if they disagree with the extent of Justin Trudeau's actions, do seem to agree that these protests needed to be stopped somehow very quickly because they were causing a ridiculous amount of harm. That has been a consistent amount of agreement I've seen among people that know a lot more about this situation than I do. So that's somewhat I guess a point in the side of Justin Trudeau, I guess.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is justified in invoking an emergency law enabling enhanced government powers to end the protest that has paralyzed the capital city of Ottawa.
By the way, this is an op-ed. This is an op-ed on the pro-Trudeau side of things. We're just going to hear it out, see what it has to say, and then we're going to listen to an op-ed on the other side of things, too.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is justified in invoking an emergency law enabling enhanced government powers to end the protest that has paralyzed the capital city of Ottawa, savaged public order, and inflicted significant damage on the world's 10th largest economy. Opinions to start the day, in your inbox. Sign up. The Prime Minister's unprecedented decision to use the Emergencies Act is also risky, as Mr. Trudeau clearly understands.
Okay.
Some of the protesters, whose ranks include an array of extremists, have signaled through intimidation, threats and aggressive conduct that they do not intend to leave Ottawa without a fight. Mr. Trudeau will have to tread carefully to avoid giving them one. He has already wisely ruled out deploying the military to unclog the city's streets, which have been paralyzed since late January with tractor-trailers blaring their horns and rumbling on diesel fuel. Nonetheless, among other expanded powers, the emergency law grants his government the right to compel towing companies to remove the trucks, which some had said they were reluctant to do. The potential for violence is real. Perhaps as useful as tow trucks, or more so. Canadian officials also say they will use the law to freeze corporate and individual bank accounts, suspend vehicle insurance, and crack down on crowdfunding and cryptocurrency sites, which have enabled the protesters to raise more than $10 million in barely 3 weeks, a chunk of it from donors in the United States.
Oh, shit. Use free voices, I guess.
Henry Olson.
Oh.
Counterpoint. Canada's Freedom Convoy protesters may be the minority, but they have the momentum.
You guys better donate so I can afford the premium.
The tantrum against the Trudeau government generally has reached a stage where it has moved beyond a legitimate expression of political opinion and dissent. By illegally occupying streets in downtown Ottawa, it has upended daily life in a city of 1 million people. It has broadened to menace supply chains by closing bridges carrying traffic to and from the United States, including, for nearly a week, a crossing near Detroit vital to the auto industry. In language by turns unhinged and menacing, it has demanded the removal or overthrow of Mr. Trudeau, who was just re-elected to a third term in September. That the protesters enjoy bellowing the word liberty does not negate the fact that their demands are blatantly anti-democratic and anti-constitutional. What they really favor is liberty from democratic norms.
True.
Nor do the protesters represent a broad-based social movement. While many in their ranks are peaceable, the leadership includes extremists and white nationalists who have railed against immigrants, trafficked in misinformation and conspiracy theories, and brandished Confederate flags.
I've seen Canadians at these Canadian trucker protests with Confederate flags. Okay? What are you doing? You're just announcing you're racist. Here in America, at the very least, if you have a Confederate flag, you have the level of plausible deniability that you're from the South and it's just your culture, your heritage, or whatever. But if you're Canadian, you have a Confederate flag, then you're just outright saying you hate black people and you want there to be slavery again. Like, there was no Confederacy in Canada. You can't say it was your heritage. You're more northern than New York. Canada historically supported the Confederates in the Civil War. Oh, I know. My point, though, that I'm making is that the people with that flag can't say, oh, my heritage. Yeah, Britain almost supported the Confederacy in the Civil War, too.
According to a poll released Monday, 3 in 4 Canadians are fed up and want an end to the protest, which was launched in anger over a government move to broaden already tough pandemic measures. The most prominent Canadian politician to give the protesters wholehearted support is Maxime Bernier, leader of a far-right party. Fundamentally, the protesters are engaged in a resolute effort to play havoc with the strictures of civilized society because they are disgruntled with the actions of a fairly elected government. The government is right to proceed with caution to restore order.
Interesting. Oh, well, that's the end of it. There we go. That was the op-ed. Fairly convincing, I will say, though. to be honest, because what we do have here is a group of either everything from astroturfed extremist demagogues who are leading this protest to terrorist cells that are armed, operating at these protests. They're breaking the law. They're fucking up commerce and the ability for the economy to function. And they are harming the ability for the residents of these cities, particularly of the capital, to do the things they need to do for their daily life. So now we're in a situation where we got this thing going on. It has to stop, okay? Because they're advocating for something that would harm the country if we listen to what and if we acquiesce to their desires, right? But if we send out police, it could get very violent, police or military, and freezing their bank accounts and suspending their insurance registration on their vehicles and whatnot is kind of 1984-y. You're kind of put in this situation where it's like, what the fuck do we do about this situation? Do we either acquiesce to these fucking psychopaths, because they're not going to stop till we acquiesce? Do we send the military in? However many people die, I guess, are both military people and protesters. Or do we breach people's civil liberties and kind of do something a little bit anti-free speech? I'm starting, honestly, to be a little bit more on the Trudeau side of things. Though, let's keep going, and we'll see. Military 100%? I don't know, because, like, I guess if they send the military, it's a higher chance of more conservatives dying. That's true. It would be really fucking cool to see, like, drone footage of a bunch of crazy right-wing terrorists thinking that they can, like, go full John Rambo on the police and the police just opening up on them. That would be really funny to see on LiveLeak. LiveLeak is dead? Well, there's other websites like LiveLeak, okay? Girl bossing a bit too close to the sun, Xan. They're criminals. They're criminals. You're okay with their fucking finances getting frozen, but not with them getting fucking peppered with bullets by the cops? Because they try to, like, go full John Rambo on the police?
Using powers granted under the Emergencies Act. The federal government has directed banks and other financial institutions to stop doing business with people associated with the anti-vaccine mandate convoy occupying the nation's capital. According to the regulations published late Tuesday, financial institutions are required to monitor and halt all transactions that funnel money to demonstrators, a measure designed to cut off funding to a...
Also, it seems like most of this Emergencies Act usage, at least from what I can tell, if we're being completely serious here, seems mostly to be being applied to the like terrorist like leaders of this protest, like the white nationalists and the terrorist cells within the protest. Like, it seems to be more focused on those breaking the law and actually going out of their way to like engage in illegal activity, more so than just the dumb fucks going, yeah, no more vaccines, yeah, just because they drank a few too many Pabst Blue Ribbons and thought it would be good to drive out to the protest that day. Like, that's my worry, okay? If it's just like terrorist cells getting caught by this, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But if it's like some good old boys from like bumfuck nowhere Alberta who aren't actual right-wing terrorists and they're not armed, they're just there to like be stupid, I don't know if I want them to get fucked by this, you know? They're not hurting anybody necessarily.
Financial institutions are required to monitor and halt all transactions that funnel money to demonstrators, a measure designed to cut off funding to a well-financed protest that has taken over large swaths of Ottawa's downtown core. What new powers do the banks have under the Emergencies Act? The government's new directive...
Wait. What new powers do the banks have under the Emergencies Act? Okay. Wait, this is giving... Okay, sounds like it's more of a the banks have permission thing than the government is making them do a thing. Okay, all right.
The government's new directive, called the Emergency Economic Measures Order, goes beyond asking banks to simply stop transferring funds to protest organizers. The government wants banks to stop doing business with some people altogether.
Oh, wait. Okay, wait. The government's new directive asking banks. Wait, chat. what does the government asking banks mean? Because if The Rock walked up to me and asked me to suck his dick, okay, you could say that was just a request, right? But like, the implication of it is, well, he's The Rock. What if I say no? You know, the implication, you know? So when the government asks an institution to do a thing, is there not usually an implication that comes with that? I'm actually asking you guys, like, what they mean by asking banks. Is it literally just the government saying, hey, you can do this if you want, I guess? Or is it like, they can say no? They can just say no. If the banks can say no and the government doesn't punish them for it or coerce them into it, that's fine, because like, even begin with, I'd be fine if the banks were out of their own volition to begin with shutting down protesters' accounts. Even if it was like, if the banks themselves were deciding on their own, yeah, we just want to shut down literally every trucker protester's account with us, I'd be fine with that. They're private. They're banks. They're private businesses. They're allowed to do what they want. They're allowed to like terminate someone's service if they don't want to provide service to them. I guess the issue that I have is if it's the government making the banks freeze people's accounts outside of scenarios where the people whose accounts are being frozen aren't criminals, okay? If it's criminals having their accounts frozen, that's just due process. That happens all the time, okay? The government freezes criminals' bank accounts all the fucking time, okay? Remember banks to gain anything from terminating or stopping banks don't gain anything from terminating or stopping a transfer. Yeah. There's no incentive, it seems like, at least inherently, for the banks to cancel these people's services.
The government wants banks to stop doing business with some people altogether. Advertisement. The order says that banks and other financial entities, like credit unions, co-ops, loan companies, trusts and cryptocurrency platforms, must stop providing any financial or related services to people associated with the protests, a move that will result in frozen accounts, stranded money and cancelled credit cards.
Whoa. The order says that banks and other financial entities, like credit unions, co-ops, loan companies, trusts, and cryptocurrency platforms must stop providing any financial or related services to people associated with the protests. Wait. No. Wait, they are doing it, though. Wait. Must isn't asking. Must stop, SMH, like I said before, it's worded as a mandate, not as a suggestion. That does not seem right. That's my problem with this. We've read through, how many articles have we read through? Like, I'm so much more informed on this already than the average person is, because the vast majority of people don't read past the headline. But we are on our fourth article into this, okay? Our fourth article in, and we still don't know if the government is requiring banks and other financial institutions to do this, or if it is simply allowing them to do it, which, let's be honest, doesn't even make sense in the first place. I'm pretty sure banks are allowed to terminate your service at any time, regardless of what the government says. I don't think the government can protect you from the bank deciding, oh yeah, we're just going to freeze your account. I know this because the bank has frozen my account before, because they thought like my card got stolen. To be honest, it might be worth going to the actual language of the order. It must be publicly available, right? Yeah, can someone drop me the order, please? Let's just go to that. You know what? Let's just go to the order, like the actual, like, the text of it, and then like text-to-speech that, and then we'll give our final take. Let's look at application and construction. This act is binding on Her Majesty and right of Canada or a province. For federal jurisdiction, for greater certainty, nothing in this act derogates from the authority of the Government of Canada to deal with emergencies on any property, territory, or area in respect to which the Parliament of Canada has jurisdiction. Okay. National emergency. For the purpose of this act, a national emergency is an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that seriously endangers the lives, health, safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. You could make a pretty strong argument That's what this protest is doing. You could make an argument that this protest is causing a national emergency. I'd agree with that. If someone said this protest was causing a national emergency, I'd agree with them. 100%. Yeah, sure. That's fine. Nothing in this act shall be constructed or applied as to confer on the governor in council the power to make orders or regulations, A, altering the provisions of this act, or providing the detention, imprisonment, or internment of Canadian citizens or permanent residents within the meaning of subsection 2.
Donated $5.
Thank you. 2.1 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act on the basis of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. So it seems like that you can't invoke this act against black people or immigrants or disabled people or gay people. So that's good. I'm glad you can't do the Emergencies Act on the gays or anything like that. Public welfare emergency sounds about right to what's going on right now. A public welfare emergency means an emergency that is caused by a real or imminent fire, flood, drought, storm, earthquake, or other natural phenomenon. No, that wouldn't be this. Disease in human beings, animals or plants, or accident or pollution. Frankly, they could probably just invoke the Emergencies Act just for COVID and the fact that all these people are protesting during COVID. Honestly, by the wording here, Trudeau could have invoked this act a long time ago, as soon as people started protesting mask mandates and stuff like that, or accident or pollution. Declaration of a public welfare emergency. When the governor and council believes, on reasonable grounds, that a public welfare emergency exists and necessitates the taking of special temporary measures for dealing with the emergency, the governor and council, after such constitution, as is required by Section 14, may, by proclamation, so declare. A declaration of a public welfare emergency shall specify a concisely the state of affairs constituting the emergency. Okay. The special temporary measures that the governor and council anticipates, I assume governor and council means, in this case, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, anticipates may be necessary for dealing with the emergency, and if the direct effects of the emergency do not extend to the whole of Canada, the area of Canada to which the direct effects of the emergency extend. So far, what Justin Trudeau has done seems to fall in line with this act legally. Go to Section 31, Orders and Regulations. It shows that what you're not allowed to do when it's enacted. Let's go ahead and look at that. Section 31. Go to the bottom of the page. There's a drop-down selection tool. It's on page 2. Okay. Oh my God, this thing is long. Wait. Oh yeah, this has pages. Oh Lord. Okay, next page. Orders and Regulations. While a declaration of an international emergency is in effect, the governor in council may make such orders or regulations with respect to the following matters as the governor and council believes, on reasonable grounds, are necessary for dealing with the emergency. A. The control or regulation of any specified industry or service, including the use of equipment, facilities, and inventory. Okay. The appropriation, control, forfeiture, use, and disposition of property or services. Okay. Wait. These aren't things you can't do. These are things you can do. Oh, it shows what you're allowed to do when it's enacted. Oh, I misread. Sorry. Okay. The authorization and conduct of inquiries in relation to defense contracts or defense supplies as defined in the Defense Production Act, or to hoarding, overcharging, black marketing, or fraudulent operations in respect to scarce commodities, including the conferment of powers under the Inquiries Act on any person authorized to conduct such an inquiry, the authorization of the entry and search of any dwelling house, premise, okay, so basically searching, the authorization or direction of any person or any person of class of persons to render essential services of a type that person or a person of that class is competent to provide, and that provision of reasonable compensation in respect to the services so rendered. Oh, you can make someone do something if you need them to do it. Like if somebody is like a medic, like an ex-military medic, you can make them do medic stuff and then compensate them for it later. Jesus. The designation and securing of protected places. The regulation of prohibition of travel outside Canada by Canadian citizens or permanent residents within the meaning of subsection 2.1 of the Immigration and Refugee Act Protection Act and of admission into Canada of other persons. And it goes on for a hot minute more. All right. I think I'm ready to give my take. I think I've done enough research that I think I can give you guys my hot take. All right. My spicy, hot, seething fucking take. All right. You've seen all the information that I have seen. Okay. You've seen all of the knowledge that I have consumed to come to this conclusion. So I don't want to see anybody accusing me of believing anything I don't, or accusing me of any weird shit that's just not true. You guys have seen me do my research and reason out my conclusion on this, okay? So I don't want to see anyone misrepresenting me, okay? Should be all good faith if you disagree, all right? You can disagree with me. Just don't misrepresent me if you disagree, okay? That's all I ask. With that said, if you had fun with this segment, please consider leaving a like, subscribe, ring the bell icon, follow my social media, all linked down below, including my Instagram, Twitter, and my fan Discord. You can also support me financially if you want to make it so that I don't live in a box by donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub over on my website, xanderhall.com/live, super chatting, super stickering, or becoming a channel member over on YouTube, or media share donating, or TTS donating through Streamlabs, or buying some of my merch. Merch, of course, linked down below. Go buy some merch. It's really good. Buy my merch. Merch. Go buy my merch. Go buy my merch.